All right, let's get going. Let people get seated. Welcome everyone to Presidio Graduate School 2024 Showcase. Yeah, give it up, give it up. There we go. We're excited to have you all here. I know people are coming in from out of town. Shout out, my dad's back there, came in from West Palm Beach, Florida. Yeah, I think there's some New Yorkers out here, so that's awesome that you guys came to celebrate partners, brothers, sisters, whoever, and yeah, see this awesome work that we've been doing over the last couple of years, 3 years, 4 years. So Showcase, this event is an opportunity for graduating students to present on either a specific project from a specific course or a unique presentation that they created for this event that's like a compilation of projects from multiple classes, maybe using the same theme. For example, agriculture across an operations course, a data analytics course, or it could just be one presentation, one project that they worked on individually or as part of a group. We did a lot of group projects. And so some of these could be the entirety of a group project or a section that was like focused on by the presenter today. So you'll be hearing 8 presentations spanning various topics, but yeah, all related to sustainability and business. If you're not familiar by now, I think you should be. So historically, Showcase had more of like a pitch deck vibe, like pitching a business idea or maybe a company to start a company or something along those lines to like a funder, VCs, potential hiring managers. You could think of like Shark Tank, but with a dance-off segment in the middle. So the goal would be to walk out of here with a 6-figure job and all the presenters are hired. I think that would be ideal. So that was part of like the original function of Showcase. I think in recent years, it's maybe shifted a little bit to be more of like a celebration of your work that the students have done for family and friends and classmates. But I think we'd like to get back towards that like pitch deck thing. We're all out here looking for work, myself included. And it would be great to have people in the industry to come see what Presidio students are doing. And yeah, maybe use this as an opportunity to see like what sustainability graduates are working on and yeah, get us some high-paying jobs. So I know it's been a little hard to follow along maybe with some of our Presidio changes, like the campus changes. Do we live in Oakland? Are we in San Anselmo, San Francisco? But I just want to welcome everyone to Redlands, where our school lives now, in this beautiful campus. And this is where Presidio has now planted its roots. So hopefully events like Showcase and graduation and our dance-offs will continue to develop, maybe with a little bit more like fervor and passion that we have like a home, which is in this room and like some of the campus you might have seen earlier. So really grateful to have that. Okay, so the event today, we're gonna listen to 8 student presentations, different topics, as I mentioned. And there will be about 8 minutes of speaking time. And then if there's a little time at the end, Q&A. And I'll facilitate Q&A and just see if people have any specific questions, then we'll check in with the Zoom room. I think we have someone also helping me monitor Zoom. So yeah, think about questions while students are presenting. And we got Marsha on our timekeeper here, so thank you for doing that. And right before we get started, just want to say a few thank yous. So we had Reed, Val, and Katie as our student team. You guys don't know what they did yet, and they're applauding. But they had a very important job. They planned Showcase. This is a student-led event. They're wrangling students during their graduation semester. So they're finishing up finals. They are getting ready to, plan this trip with their families coming in from out of town. And these 3 did an awesome job of like getting the slide decks in, and just like the last thing we're probably thinking about is doing another presentation. So thank you all. Emily back here, our rock. Yeah. Organizing a lot of these events, always saying yes. I think all the answers probably live in Slack. Yeah, I know we email you all the time and you're just like, hey, where's this? What do we do now? And you always respond with positivity, so that's good. Matthew Victor, our fearless tech leader back there, thank you. And Emily Plessier, I think I got that right, who's taken on the role of our executive director, and she's also a former student, and that's just really great for our future as a school for events like Showcase, because she really understands the student experience. So thank you for this new role. Yeah. All right, let's get to it. First up, we have Bryce talking about greenhouse gas accounting. It's a consulting service and sort of in a pitch style in the course of capstone. So Bryce, you are up.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so like Alex said, mine is a kind of traditional business pitch. So I would love to come out of here with a six-figure job. That'd be ideal for me. So hi everyone, my name is Bryce Rasmussen. I am a dual degree MPA MBA graduate, C35. And during my time at Presidio, I kind of used Presidio to transition from a career in corporate market research within the financial industry into sustainability. And I've really found that I really enjoy greenhouse gas accounting as kind of a starting point to get into sustainability consulting as a profession. Cool.
That cool.
Yeah.
I just leave that on board.
All right. So I did a capstone project actually in partnership with Katie Boyce. We did a kind of qualitative startup validation project on, how much demand is there from corporate sustainability teams to contract out outside help for greenhouse gas accounting, since it's such a time intensive, scope of work that every sustainability team is responsible for. And so the market problem statement that we started with was, corporate decarbonization is becoming a bigger priority for regulators, investors, customers. And so sustainability reporting teams are having to keep up with all of these evolving demands from regulators, investors, and as well as all these changes to corporate, greenhouse gas accounting standards. So every year it's like you have to kind of start from square one with new best practices. And there are a lot of challenges with greenhouse gas accounting today, both from the external reporting standpoint, as well as the internal operations that need to go into greenhouse gas accounting work. So let's start with the external. So for investors and regulators, one of the primary issues is that sustainability accounting, as it's done today, is not standardized. Companies are using different source data that has different units of measure, methodologies are different. And there's just it's hard to compare one company's climate impacts to another. Also, data quality is low. It's hard to, when you're a sustainability manager, you have to kind of encourage everyone else in your organization to take on a sustainability lens and kind of buy into this effort that you have to do of sourcing all the electricity data from all your company's buildings and getting all this product use data from operations managers. And it's hard work to get everyone on board. So sustainability teams are, they have a lot on their plate, and investors, are constantly demanding more and more information. As I said, the internal sustainability teams, especially with scope 3, which is the emissions from all of your suppliers and the vendors that you do business with, it's a lot of work to herd your suppliers and contact, everyone that you purchase goods and services from to get the data from them that you need to, showcase how many emissions you have from your scope 3 suppliers. Also, achieving assurance quality of greenhouse gas inventories. So that is achieving a quality that is auditable and can be verified by a third-party assurance agency is really hard. And it takes a lot of work to document all the assumptions, methodologies, and estimations that go into your greenhouse gas accounting work. So this, I like to kind of present my approach to sustainability performance and management and measurement consulting. Recently graduated from Presidio, and I also did the FSA Fundamentals of Sustainability Accounting exam. And so I've kind of been positioning myself as an independent contractor for specifically greenhouse gas accounting work. And I try to align all my work to the greenhouse gas protocol as well as ISO 14064. And with each of my projects, I also like to include competitive benchmarking to help companies understand how are we doing in comparison to others in our industry when it comes to sourcing and disclosing all this emissions data. Are there categories that we're missing perhaps, or are we, how are we doing on our decarbonization performance as well? So I am starting to offer these services. This is kind of the first iteration of my pitch deck, and I think it'll kind of evolve over time. But I really enjoy working on this kind of work, and I'm excited to present this with you all today. So for, the audience of a potential client, this is kind of what I would like to, showcase as my approach to a typical project. So kickoff workshop and educational walkthrough. This isn't something that everyone just immediately knows and can understand what greenhouse gas accounting is. So it takes a lot of kind of education, getting everybody in the room that, is a data owner, internal control teams, and helping everyone understand what needs to go into the data sourcing part of a project in order to get comprehensive and accurate emissions data. And then do one-on-one meetings with each of the data owners to ensure that they understand, like the facilities manager, that they know that they have to get these invoices of all their kilowatt hours of energy used at all the locations for, said months, whether it's fiscal or calendar year, and just trying to really handhold through, understanding what needs to be done so that this third step, data sourcing and validation of the source data is quick and efficient. I also work in partnership with Tom Crowell a lot. He's another alumni certificate of Presidio. And one of the nice things about working in partnership with Tom is that we can kind of audit each other's work. And that is a big value add, I think, when you're considering going for third-party assurance, is that, we've already had two kind of greenhouse gas accounting experts look at each of the formulas, the source data, and it kind of offers a little bit extra, assurance that this work is rock solid and can be ready for an assurance by a third party. And then a final report with carbon management recommendations. So, especially with the peer benchmarking, looking at opportunities to reduce emissions, whether it's, reducing energy usage from the source or switching to different green power options that you have available in the various jurisdictions that you have operations. I like to kind of bring a more personalized touch to the projects with the carbon management recommendations. And here's kind of an example of what like the summary sheet would look like. So you can kind of see has a kind of exhaustive coverage of all the greenhouse gas protocol categories with a year-over-year change. And this is just kind of a snippet of a larger Excel tool that I use to run each of these projects. So if you need help with your sustainability performance and measurement, I encourage you to contact me. I like to think that I'm not just here to help companies make glossy booklets for investor eyes only. I truly think that greenhouse gas accounting is one of the most important applications of corporate sustainability to hold companies accountable for their net zero claims and ensure that it's not just greenwashing. So thank you, everyone. And let me know if you have any questions.
I'm just kind of hanging out right here. Cool. All right. Thank you, Bryce. Bryce and I started this program together in a small cohort of 5 people. So stoked to be finishing up with you, man. All right. We got a question over here.
Sure.
So once you've done the accounting, you then make recommendations for like how to take action.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think one of the important things is setting a baseline year, which is, getting a year where you have ability to get full comprehensive data of your emissions. And from that point, you can understand where are we getting the most emissions, whether it's in scope 3 or scope 2, and it kind of, start to get a heat check on, where can we start to look at making capital investments to reduce carbon. And a lot of times it comes down to energy, but yeah, I think there's, depending on the business model and the industry, there's a lot of different opportunities based on best practices out there and in different research papers on doing decarbonization. So, yeah.
Let's also just check the Zoom chat. Do we have any in Zoom? We do. Got that. Yeah. We got one. All right, let's do one in Zoom, then we'll come back to the room, and then we'll.
For companies with scope 3.1 reduction goals, how would you provide assurance to that company that switching to a new supplier with LCA documented decreases in the C footprint of key raw materials and helping their GHG reduction goals?
So this is for purchased goods and services, right?
We could open up the chat.
Yeah, let's see.
I think it's that one. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin Ward, for the question. Yeah, so the question is for companies with scope 3.1 reduction goals, how do you provide assurance that the company that switching to a new supplier with LCA documented decreases the C footprint, carbon footprint? Well, I think especially it's not always about getting to a supplier that has reduced emissions. A lot of times in the current state of greenhouse gas accounting, it's about getting to a supplier that's more transparent. And LCAs are kind of the gold standard, right, for scope 3 emissions. And that's a life cycle assessment where they do a detailed kind of study of how many emissions or what other ecological impacts does this product have even through the end of life. And so, yeah, I think priority of using tier 1 suppliers that do LCAs and have full LCA documentation for 100% of their products is always ideal. So yeah, I think that's a good question. Obviously, a supplier with fewer emissions is better, but also a supplier that has more transparent disclosure of their emissions is better. So
Let's get one more in the room.
yeah.
Okay.
This is probably complete ignorance. Are there federal regulations governing this, like based on company size or anything, or is all of this just voluntary reporting and practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are 2 California Senate bills, 253, 261, that require companies that do business in California over $1 billion of revenue to disclose their scope 3 indirect emissions. There's a new SEC ruling. That's not law yet. I think it still has to pass the House, or it's been an open comment. It's passed the Senate, but that would require scope 1 and 2 disclosure. And so, you know, everyone's kind of preparing from a risk management perspective to not be caught with their pants down, for lack of a better term, with those regulations. But there's also a lot of voluntary market pressure from investors to do this work. There's a lot to be gained from disclosing and reducing your emissions, from lower cost of capital to, you know, lower cost of revenue. And there's a lot of market benefits to disclosing and reducing your carbon from an operational cost and investment standpoint.
Great. Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you.
Good job, man. That's so smart, man. All right. Up next, we have Mary Fox, I believe, talking about regenerative agriculture, which is between 2 different courses, both capstone and a new elective that we were in together called regenerative business practices. So Mary, why don't you take it away? Yeah.
Hi, everybody. If you're to go away with anything today, it would be, and my hope is that you forget about using the word sustainability and think about replacing it with regenerative thought. So I'm Mary Fox. I grew up in San Anselmo. No. But I'm here today and wanted to upfront thank SPE for the capstone project that I undertook, and also a shout out to Roxanne, who did a great deal of research with me on that, and also to the regenerative class, which is a new class which I took with Dwight, Elizabeth, and Marcia, who are here. So thank you for that. And so regenerative agriculture, what is it? And so essentially, if you can think of it, is whatever you take out, you put back in, you replace. Think of it in a way that the actual nature takes care of itself, and it takes care of the people on that planet as well. And so during this course, we talk a lot about sustainability and how we can maintain things. But we moved very quickly onto how can we create a world where we work symbiotically with nature? And how can we create a food system that is mainstream and that this food system supplies the world? And so thus we have a question mark, making regenerative agriculture mainstream. And people are not believing that yet. So hopefully it's not all our research. It's a very, very tiny portion of what we're going to do, or what I'm going to talk to you about. So I'll quickly run through that. But just so you know, regenerative agriculture is about soil health. It's about biodiversity, and it's also about putting, by you doing that, you put water back into the system so that regrowth is possible. And so quickly, we'll talk about the problem, research we did, insights we got, how we reframed the problem after those insights, the market we hope to tackle, and then the solution we came up with. And so the problem, and as you can see here, we started out with, it was twofold really. How can we get more farmers on board and adopt these practices? And then how can we make this mainstream? In other words, all this food here is going to be produced by regenerative farmers. The restaurants work with those farmers. The distributors work with those farmers, and the farmers see market signals so that they know that they can produce and make a profit. And so just to give you the stats there, less than 1% right now of agricultural production comes from regenerative practices. Who we spoke to, I'll let you read those yourself, but we looked at the full supply chain from the farmer right through to the consumer. Nobody was untouched in the sense of we had full picture from economists, we had food companies, innovators in tech, and also all along the supply chain. This is some of the farmers we talked to, and our target customers, you know, from the small farmers up to medium-sized farmers in organic space, in regenerative, and in conventional, in other words, traditional space. Our research showed that, and this is a lot of research, and in fact, farms that working farms, and this particular statistic is from the Midwest, that farms can be profitable. And this, if the transition happens. And in fact, instead, so if you have a focus, less focus on production and more focus on the soil health. And so the findings that came from the research, non-intensive farmers are struggling financially. There was one farmer we visited. He's in the business 40 years and he's built up an amazing practice. And Phil and Catherine, for the last 3 years, are not making money despite having supply chains to go to Whole Foods and whatnot, despite that. And so what else is going on? Farmers are motivated to change. They want to change. They want to help us. They understand the problem and they want to pass on a legacy to the next generation. It's all about soil health. I talk to farmers, I talk to tech experts, I talk to people in universities and doing research on this, and they said we have to start with soil health. If we get the soil right, everything else falls into place. And then this does require a system level shift, which we are well equipped to understand, having gone through Marsha's class in Presidio. But it is possible to simultaneously produce food and conserve natural resources at a profit. And this is where the understanding is lost. And right now we have a current food system that doesn't support that. And what happens is you have farmers producing, but we don't, and hoping that they're going to have somebody to buy their produce. And then on the other end, you have retailers who are not giving them a market signal that sale is secure. And it's as simple as that. And so after all our research, we started reframing how we looked on this. And so how can we build a food supply chain with a clear market signal coming from the buyers of that food, right down to where it's being produced? And that is the only way that we can actually create a mainstream food system. In the market that we were tackling, we have gone into the numbers here in terms of, this would be our first target market, which is family-owned and operated farms. And so the solution we came up with is a dedicated on-site transition teams who will guide farmers in this regenerative journey. So the platform, so it's very important that ownership is maintained at the farm level. And then the market signals are coming from the retailers. And so it becomes a circular marketplace where you know what to produce, and with the guarantee of a market. And so Journey's End, so the project we were doing, we did not build this platform. We're at the point where, should we go ahead, should we not? And so, yeah, I would say it's not the journey's end. And so we're going to continue these practices and create a world that is worth passing on, particularly to my nieces and nephews here. And so that journey has brought us to, okay, can we do this? And yes, we absolutely can. It's just a matter of people coming together and understanding that market, understanding that, and it starts with the consumer. But it very, very much rests with the farmers and their connection to the retails where that is going to be purchased. And so I would say to all of you, before you get up and avail of the food here, think about where that has come from and think about the fabric of American life and where that rural aspect and how that will set up the next generations to come, because at the end of the day, we all come from that natural source. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, let's do one question, I think, for time purposes. Looks like back there went up right away.
What's the landscape of certification standards, and how do we know if we're getting regenerative foods or oscillated from
So it's funny you bring that up. Certifications, forget about certifications. Most of the farmers said to us, there's also, we talked to nonprofits who are in the certification space, and they are actually pivoting because there's a lot of confusion out there between what's organic, what is regenerative. And at the end of the day, if you just look at it, it's about the soil health. And if you have a measurable way of checking what the soil health is and you're bringing that up to spec, that should be what the certification is. And so you've got a lot of farmers, producers just clinging to this certification, and it's actually not working. Not working to what we want to do is bring organic and regenerative agriculture into the mainstream. It would take too long. It requires a big shift. Oh, yeah. So in terms of what you're getting as, I mean, there still can be, regenerative certification. There can be that, and there still is, but the system is not set up so that is recognizable right now. And so the organic system, yeah, it's you go to a farmer's market and it's all labeled. But I challenge any of you to look and see how many people actually believe in that, because it's really, really the information is very, very much it's not spread in a way that people understand exactly what's happening.
All right, thanks, Mary. There will be a happy hour / poster session after this. So if you do have questions, we'll be mingling and hold on to those and we can ask them right after this. All right, up next, so we can keep things moving. We have Katie presenting on a collection of her work from both her MPA and MBA degree, which focuses on textile sustainability and fast fashion.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone. As Alex mentioned, I'm going to be your guide in discussing the textile industry and fast fashion versus sustainable practices for the next 10 or so minutes through a variety of different lenses that I've been able to explore in my past 2.5 years at Presidio. So let's dive in. To consider the problem, I actually want to begin with a question. What do you think of when you think of the fashion industry? As a whole, it's easy to consider the glamour and effortless style associated with fashion imagery and icons, but in reality, the true cost of fashion is much higher, both environmentally and socially. Globally, 92 million tons of textile waste is produced annually. Of this, 17 million tons are produced by the US. And the fashion industry as a whole has been named the second most polluting industry, making up 8% of all carbon emissions, 20% of all global wastewater, and 7% of global landfill space. So how did we get here? Before diving in, I also just want to quickly acknowledge that all of this is very nuanced. And so we're not going to be able to dive in as deeply as I would like into everything, but I'm going to throw that out there. So we can't really talk about this topic without talking about synthetics. Synthetic fibers are a big reason why scaling production to the current levels that we see is available in the first place. These fiber types rose out of the invention of nylon in 1938 and the expansion of plastic use following World War II. Since then, the synthetic market has expanded to a variety of synthetic and semi-synthetic fiber types as seen on the screen here. These fibers are predominantly derived from petroleum and other fossil fuels, with polyester traditionally created from polyethylene terephthalate, which is a type of plastic. And while these numbers are expected to grow, synthetic fibers have currently captured more than 2/3 of the entire textile industry. And of this, polyester dominates, representing over 50% of the garments available. And to understand why this is the case, we need to look at the relationship between scale and cost, as well as fashion models, which of course brings us to fast fashion. In large part because of synthetics, textile production has been able to scale while minimizing the cost incurred by the producer. With increased production capacity, the fast fashion model has exploded, resulting in a 60% increase in textile consumption over the past 15 years, while the average household spending on clothes is just 5% today. Within the fast textile model, consumers are also holding on to garments for less time before disposing of them, with many low-quality garments estimated to be used just a few times before being disposed of. To put this into perspective, this all means that right now, we have enough clothes on the planet to dress the next 6 generations of people. So considering this, let's talk about the overall environmental impact. Many of textiles are eventually shipped to countries in the global south, roughly translating to 15% of all textile waste from the US, or 2.5 million tons of clothes. Of these garments, over half were immediately considered waste due to being of unwearable quality. And this practice of sending unwearable and damaged garments over to other countries is called export dumping. So as a result of export dumping, and even if garments are not immediately disposed of when they are received, most of these items are eventually still landfilled or incinerated, which brings the total amount of waste generated from the textile industry up to 99% of all clothes. This practice has created disastrous public health issues for these countries around air and water pollution as a result of the prevalence of synthetics in the industries, because incineration can potentially release dioxins, while dumping the clothes without proper maintenance can result in microplastics being released into the air and allow them to also leach into nearby water sources. What about the social impact? When thinking of garment workers, it's really easy to consider other countries where garment production levels are high, but I also want to acknowledge that a lot of these concerns are also prevalent within the US. So considering compensation, the garment industry often takes a piece rate approach, with workers being paid pennies per garment produced and often making significantly less than the minimum wage. With COVID shutdowns, wage theft became a noticeable trend, with many workers' compensation being withheld from them, and many have still yet to receive that compensation. Additionally, many of the factories people work within are not up to codes or standards, which results in health concerns and high injury rates that are made worse by the lack of breaks and long hours that people have to work. And finally, it's really important to recognize that 80% of all garment workers are women of color. It's also well documented that garment workers commonly experience gender-based violence as a result of this. So what can we do about it? Starting with regulations. There's a whole mess of arrows here, but this shows the current regulatory landscape for textile EPR or extended producer responsibility laws, and how they relate to one another, as well as previous policies in order to increase regulations on chemical use and product sustainability and responsibility for the companies that are entering these products onto the market. And while we aren't going to dive in too deeply, it's a clear trend that Europe is more mature with regard to developing and implementing policies to hold clothing producers accountable. While comparatively, the US is just beginning its journey, it's also likely that additional regulations will pick up with time. Europe also experienced a lag between the initial textile EPR policy introduced by France in 2008 and the block of policies right in the middle in the pink that have been introduced or proposed over the past few years. So in further developing the regulatory environment, these policies will help to provide a foundation in addressing textile waste streams, which brings us to our next opportunity. Alternative ends of life help to challenge the traditional linear life cycle of take, make, waste. With secondhand clothing, mending practices, and reuse opportunities increasing the overall lifespan of a garment and thereby reducing the environmental impact. Each of these present really important opportunities to mitigate textile waste, and as mentioned earlier, ultimately 99% of all clothes still end up landfilled or incinerated, which brings us to the opportunity of textile recycling. So there are two main types of textile recycling: mechanical, which can be seen in the pink, and olive, mechanical, which can be seen in the olive, and chemical, which can be seen in the pink. And these translate to open loop or closed loop recycling. So closed loop recycling is ultimately where the big opportunity presents. And there's a lot of companies that are doing innovation here in order to, by using this method, it allows for the fiber quality to be retained over time. And so it allows for a cyclical nature, whereas open loop recycling, ultimately garments are still, like, the quality degrades over time. And so it's easier for them to be landfilled eventually as well. And currently only 1% of textile waste is fiber to fiber recycled using that closed loop cyclical method. So this provides a great opportunity for EPR policies that we just talked about, while also creating a new feedstock for future product lines. And then considering many of the social impacts that we talked about in the system, there are existing regulations, but a lot of the challenges that we just talked about are due to a lack of comprehensive enforcement. So there are a few recommendations here, including increasing brand accountability, which highlights the need for better supplier relations, especially in the case of many large brands. The second is closing enforcement loopholes with expanding or amending existing regulations in order to include major brands. And the third is engaging stakeholders throughout the process in order to truly understand what's needed to address the situation and ensure that it's carried out effectively. And with that, I would like to thank you all, welcome any questions, and also give a special thanks to teammates and professors who have helped throughout this journey.
All right, thank you, Katie. We've got time for 2 questions. Let's do one in the room and one on Zoom if it's there.
Have you looked into other industries? Building technology, other beyond fashion.
Beyond fashion. Yeah, for those on Zoom, the question was if I had looked into this beyond just textiles and fashion, right?
Beyond.
Yeah, beyond clothes. Not really, like a little bit throughout other projects, but mostly where I could focus on fashion, I wanted to, because in Marcia's class, my first semester, I realized how much I enjoyed talking about this and how excited I was about it. But I'm sure that there are parallels between other industries, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So that's where the EPR regulations come into place, because so extended producer responsibility, it means that like Macy's, if they are entering garments into the United States market for consumers to purchase, then they will be responsible for those garments at the end of life. And so a lot of that was go back, the huge mess of this. And so a lot of these have specific collection rates that companies have to comply with, recycling rates that companies have to comply with. And so it puts more of the onus on the brands rather than on individual consumers, which is also, I believe that individual action absolutely makes a difference. But to your point, if we can engage companies and big corporations, and that's where we'll really move the needle. So yeah.
Sweet.
Great.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah. Appreciate it. Welcome to the newcomers in the back. I know some of y'all. Thanks for being here. All right, we're gonna do one more, and then we're gonna take a really quick stretch break. I won't let you go outside, just around your chair. Okay, next up, we have Eleanor talking about food systems, and this is like a body of her 2-year period of time, so spanning multiple classes as well. All right, Eleanor, let's do it.
All right. Well, hi. Today I'm excited to take you through my journey at Presidio over these past 2 years, which has helped me personally find a passion in the business of food and the systems that bring us our food today. So thanks, Mary, for giving us a primer in that. So that's me. I like food. That is me eating a sandwich with my friend Drew over here. It's been a big part of my life since growing up, getting sweet corn at the stand in Iowa, to seeing my dad's heirloom tomato garden every summer, to meeting our Thanksgiving turkey, to having the occasional nice dinner with my mom. And I've also foraged for my food, I've fished for my food, and I've been lucky enough to travel and try food from around the world. So it's been all around me. But it's not till I came to PGS that I realized how problematic the systems we've created around food have become. So I decided to tackle this tiny problem. So today, through this presentation, and hopefully just in 10 minutes, I'm going to take you through my work and how it all intertwines in this big, complicated system of ours. So let's get into it. Unsustainable food production systems contribute significantly to our warming planet. According to the World Resource Institute, agriculture uses almost half of the world's vegetated land, consumes 70% of our fresh water, and generates nearly a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions. And with all that energy, almost 1/3 of all of it is either lost or wasted. And yet 30% of the globe still does not have consistent access to food. And these problems are global, as is the reality of our global economy, but it also happens in our own backyards. I live there in New York City, and you might think, that's a big city, everyone probably has access to food. Well, the reality is they don't. Problems such as food deserts and food waste prevail there. As of 2018, about 1.3 million folks in NYC have gone hungry daily. And as we see here, many are closer to bodegas, which sell like highly processed foods, rather than grocery stores that sell fresh, healthy foods. So that's where I started, this tiny problem of food deserts in my first class at PGS at Systems, Sustainability, and Social Justice. And with 3 other classmates, we mapped it out. This is what's called a systems map. So we tried to make sense of the problem and all of the interconnected factors that make up the problem of food deserts. So we tried to dive in and really understand it. We also looked at the history of food deserts, the stakeholders and systems, and how they all interact. For example, one finding is the relationship between grocers in a residential area and private investment in a residential area, and how it's a reinforcing loop. So more investment in a community means more grocers will come, and more grocers in a community means more investment will come. So bottom line, we see how higher income neighborhoods are closer to grocers and thereby access to fresh, healthy food. But I wanted to dive in deeper and see what is going on for these grocers, right? And what is going on for shoppers at the grocery stores. So I wanted to dig further into this, and I convinced my accounting team to do our accounting project on Costco. And through this, we began to understand how a grocer works, what makes them tick. And we saw how low margin a grocery business is. There's very intense competition, high labor costs, high material costs. And this means grocery stores are very picky about where they put their stores. Cue food deserts. And these thin margins have also meant they've put things like sustainability on the back burner. For example, Costco only started tracking these things in 2021. And so we still see lots of food waste in grocery stores, as well as lots of single-use packaging. But grocery stores ultimately have a lot to say about what we eat and what we choose to eat, because we're going to the grocery store and we don't have, as much say. We have to take what's there. But what do consumers really want, right? Like what are their priorities? And so in my next class, marketing, I spent a semester working with a frozen food brand, discovering exactly what goes through their heads at the grocery store. We interviewed and surveyed over 130 people and found out that for brands considering how to market sustainability, health really comes first, and sustainability is just a perk. But as we see on the right, you can't really see it, but price is number one, right? And it takes precedence over health as well. And we've all been affected by the squeeze at the grocery store, right? Like inflation has really, we've all seen it at the grocery store. So I also wanted to understand what's happening for the producers of our food and the price setters of our food. If we want that full picture, we need to consider them. So first, I worked on a project with an organic sauerkraut company and mapped out their whole operations, as you see here, and really understood what it takes to run a food manufacturing business. And ultimately, it's really not easy for the ones that are trying to produce organic foods to the market, that are small companies trying to support their local economies, barely scraping by with very little resources and help available to them. They're also facing high organic prices and limited knowledge from the consumer of why those organic prices are so high. And why are they? Well, we needed to talk to the farmers to see what's really going on farm. So myself and my capstone team went straight to the source, the farmers. For the sauerkraut company, right, they want cheaper prices, just as the consumers do for that organic product. But it turns out that the farmers of these organic goods aren't making the money either. Overall, only 15 cents of every dollar we spend goes to the farmer. The rest is all processing and marketing our food. And growing food is very different from all those other things that the farmer has to do, like applying for grants, and marketing themselves as a business as well. They are just needing to make money, basically, and they're not. So through all these, we're not really seeing anyone making money here. And you might be feeling a little bit like this. As we like to say at Presidio, these are wicked problems. But I did want to leave you today with some key takeaways and key leverage points that I've identified throughout the work I've outlined through this presentation, through my work at my MBA, to make strides towards a more resilient and sustainable, equitable food system. We need to reduce food waste, especially from households like yours and mine, which is that 1/3 of all like food waste, and households account for 60% of that. And what we do waste, we need to compost at home or commercially, but we need investment in infrastructure to do that. We also, I mean, actions at home are important, right? But we also need policy to stop subsidizing unsustainable forms of agriculture, such as animal farms and large conventional agriculture. And like Mary mentioned, regenerative agriculture is the way. This is a real life side-by-side of industrial agriculture and the benefits of regenerative agriculture, drawing down CO2 into the ground rather than letting it go into the air. And we need to pay farmers a living wage, provide them necessary services to take on this massive undertaking of feeding a growing population, reduce food insecurity, ensure a safe, sustainable, and prosperous future for all. And that's what I hope to do. Businesses are the ones that really have the money and the say in how to make that change. So that's what I want to do after I graduate from Presidio. So thank you.
All right, some questions. Let's, I think we got time for one question. Yeah.
Like, throughout all of these, where did you identify like the top?
Yeah, so I think to go back to cows, I've found that, you know, cows and like ruminants who burp out like what they eat, that creates methane, which is 30 times more potent than CO2. And this accounts for half of all agriculture emissions throughout the globe. So I think cows are a big topic. They also take tons of land, and contribute to deforestation. So that's kind of where I want to start. I'm really focused on that. I'm a vegetarian, but I drink milk. So I think that's a good place to start to make strides. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. All right, so let's take a quick break. I think, do you think we have 10 minutes? We can do that? Yeah, let's do a really hard 10. And we got 3 more presentations after that, followed by some food, drinks, and some poster sessions. So we'll see you all back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Yeah, oh, restrooms, if you need them, are around the corner here under this exit sign to the left. My left, your right. Yeah. Oh, women's restrooms are upstairs. Same direction. Hi. Yeah.
I want to keep my face in front of.
Oh yeah, so put
the
your,
cameras here, right?
yeah, so check it out. Let me move this. And everyone on Zoom should be able to hear now, I think.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole, and 2 semesters ago, I presented a project in data analytics for social impact about TBI and car crashes. I also published a Medium article about my research. And a lot of students in this class picked topics that they deeply cared about, which is not surprising coming from Presidio students. And this topic was personal to me, and I'm very passionate about it. And to give you a little bit more context, we framed our research in this class towards a specific audience. And the audience that I chose for my research was towards Bill Pascrell, who is the New Jersey U.S. representative and head of the TBI caucus in Congress, as well as Pete Buttigieg, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. And so to center our audience, I'm going to start off with a story. 4 years ago, in October 2019, about a year and a half before I started at Presidio, I survived a traumatic car accident. In this car accident, we were in a rural area of Delaware, about 2 hours away from the nearest trauma center. We were also hit by a Dodge Ram. And if you know these trucks, these are massive 1,000-pound cars. And the larger a car is, the more deadly and impactful the crash can be. And so I want you to hold on to these details because we're going to come back to them later on in the presentation during the recommendations for these public health issues of road safety and TBI care. Oh, no.
You're good. Okay.
Oh.
Everyone here.
Okay. I always giggle during presentations. Okay. And so to look at this on a systems level, the access that someone has to care after a traumatic brain injury has a plethora of effects on their recovery. And many rural areas don't have access, as well as in urban areas as well, don't have access to emergency care and also to TBI rehabilitation centers. And recovery isn't just about initial treatment, it's about ongoing care and support. People with limited access to specialized care experience worse outcomes, which can lead to further financial burdens and challenges in returning to their normal lives and work because of ongoing health issues. And so I want you to take a mental image of where these darker areas are, where there's higher rates, because in this next image, this comes from a trauma association website that has mapped out where all of the trauma centers are in the United States. And we can see here that in the rural areas like Montana and Wyoming, where there were high rates of both car crashes and TBI deaths, they don't even have access to one level 1 trauma center. The red dots are the level 1 and the orange are level 2. And it doesn't just stop there. There are inequalities wrapped up in who is dying the most from car crashes and from TBIs. Traffic fatalities are much more common in low-income neighborhoods and amongst Native and Black Americans. In fact, Native Americans have had the highest TBI death rates since 2017, and car crashes account for high rates of TBI deaths. And the reasons? There are not enough resources put into these areas. This causes low access to trauma centers, poor roadways, systems, socioeconomic differences in vehicle quality, and overall poor healthcare systems. And now you might be wondering, how are these two issues again related? These are the two maps that I showed at the beginning. And this also illustrates how road system infrastructure is linked with healthcare systems. And just to jump ahead a little for time, I'm gonna get into the recommendations that I have for the US. We need to shift our culture around car dependency. This can be done through amplifying public transportation by making buses, trains, and bike lanes more accessible, more efficient, and safer for everyone. We also need to invest and put in more resources into safe street infrastructure, especially in vulnerable areas that need it the most, such as improving roadways, crosswalks, lights, stop signs. We also need to integrate car safety within policy through more regulations like vehicle weights, like I mentioned how heavy that Dodge Ram was, and car sizes and safer designs in general. And then on the other hand, end of things with TBI care, while TBI is an invisible injury, it's not. It's a physical injury, and policy needs to reflect this with more services and grants. The CDC has started a registry system, or what they call as a TBI surveillance system, but they need to keep improving this to expand on research. We also need to increase access to care. We can do this through offering more additional free services, community-based rehabilitation centers, and as well as expanding the categories that insurance is required to cover. Right now, most healthcare insurances don't cover cognitive disabilities or TBI care. And so going back to needing more services in rural areas, we also need more incentives for physicians and for specialty care to move out into these rural areas to be able to offer more services. And by requiring insurance to pay for these specialty providers, it could encourage more people to move out there, and it could cause a positive feedback loop to get more providers to move out and stay in those areas, thus improving overall infrastructure. And so to round us out, to bring us back to the story that I told in the beginning, I'll never know if any of these solutions would have had made any difference on the outcomes of the car crash I was in. But after this project, I believe that we can prevent more car crashes and more traumatic and less traumatic brain injuries with added attention to these issues, extra resources, and the power of storytelling.
Good. All right, thank you, Nikki. Do we have any questions, either online or in the room? Zoom's good, okay.
Would you have a look at in back to brain? One of the things in the UK at the moment is a big focus on inexperienced drivers causing more concussions, particularly between the ages of 18 and 25. And I wonder whether you focused on that as part of the causes of those.
I'm just going to repeat the question really quick for Zoom because they were saying they couldn't hear all the questions from the room. So this is about 18 to 25 age range, and if there was research put into the impact of like inexperienced driving on this issue.
So you were asking specifically about the UK, correct? So I focused my research primarily on the US. I made this image to show some opportunity mapping about how the US is an outlier. And so I didn't look specifically at the UK, but they do tend to have lower death rates of
About
collisions.
the age range from like younger, did you pay attention to that? If there was.
And the data did show that there were more crash fatalities amongst younger populations in the US, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Nikki. Excellent job. All right, next up, we have Drew, and Drew is going to present a portfolio of his work from the last 2 years. And this presentation will conclude with a solution he designed and directed to bridge luxury lifestyle brands and sustainability. All right.
Just go back to slide 1.
Oh, shit, sorry.
Quick spoiler.
Yeah. Let's get you full screen. Is that good? Is that okay with you right here? Maybe if you move that bar really quick.
It's like a thing down here.
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool.
Cool. Where's that? Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Harrington. Similar to Eleanor, I came here from New York City. I decided to get an MBA to formalize my homegrown skills and uplevel my sustainability knowledge. Ultimately with the goal to further impact and who knows, maybe bring some ideas to life, but where to begin? Whenever I came to Presidio, I knew that sustainability could be a lot of things and people buy a lot of stuff. So who knows, maybe study things that people buy. And I thought let's use this opportunity and privilege to challenge myself. And boy, do people buy a lot of stuff. Whenever I saw this list or a similar list to this around consumption patterns and habits, I started asking myself a few questions. What are the things that I know very little about? What are things that I care about? And what's something that will fuel my curiosity? Through this questioning, a few things became a little bit more clear. I love clothing, I love apparel, and gosh, do I love to build out a space. I love interior design, home goods, furnishings. And I thought that was a pretty novel idea. So back to the drawing board. And I decided to focus on that exactly, apparel and furnishings, and what ideas and study could I do during this time to maybe change the world. And it's academia, so we had to have a little fancy title. Wouldn't it be school without red line markups, right? So I've spent the last 2 years kind of more or less focused on this area. And I thought navigating sustainability and luxury apparel would be a winning idea. So boom, I did just that. Over the next few minutes, Marsha, I'm so sorry I didn't start my own timer, so I'll rely on you and your 2-minute cards to know I'm getting towards the end. I'll cover a portfolio of my work in 5 classes during my time in Presidio. First was in Marsha's class called SSSJ, or Systems, Sustainability, and Social Justice. This class culminates with a business pitch, and I decided, you know, I like Louis Vuitton, and they're probably not the most sustainable brand, so let's figure out what Louis Vuitton is doing in the world of sustainability. This screenshot on the right is just a title cover page of their Life 360 report. And essentially it's the sustainability and social justice efforts that not only LVMH, but their entire holding company is kind of promising the world that they'll bring to life. And in this report, they actually say that 25% of their profits by the year 2030 will be from circular products. That's quite challenging because Louis Vuitton is one of the only luxury brands remaining today that doesn't own recircularity or reselling of secondhand items. I decided to focus this business pitch on exactly that. I crunched some numbers pretty quickly thanks to the help of some of my peers in my accounting class. And if Louis Vuitton were to pilot a secondary resale bag program of leather goods and handbags, starting with just 1,400 bags a year, they'd be able to add $15.4 million to the bottom line. This is a pretty big idea. Louis Vuitton owns over 5,500 stores globally, and they have 75 houses or brands. Louis Vuitton is just one logo that consumers may recognize. And so entering the market with this pilot is just a seed to sow to meet their guarantee of sustainability and circularity for the future. Speaking of additional classes and more luxury brands, again, another class taught by Marsha and Dwight here in the front row is regenerative business practices. Mary touched on this a little bit in one of her classes, as a few of the other fellow presenters have as well. But regenerative business practices essentially prioritize the replenishment and restoration of environmental consumption and the demands that brands place on society in order to make communities, the ecosystems, and the economies more sustainable than before they entered them. This course was intended to conduct primary research and analyze a brand on their promises in regenerative business practices. Similar to Louis Vuitton, Gucci and their holding company make some pretty promising reports. I am pleased to inform you all, though, that Gucci is quite an exciting case study because out of the luxury brands in the entire world, they actually netted $11 billion in the year 2021 alone. So they have a lot of eyes on them. They have a lot of money, so they can actually meet these promises, hopefully, to consumers. They're one of the first luxury brands to make this commitment and actually produce a product line called Off the Grid. Off the Grid is one of the first luxury product lines in the world that features recycled material, organics, and bio-based. And this is really serving as a proof that consumers are demanding this and that it is possible to bring luxury goods to market that are clean and regenerative. Speaking of cleaning up our supply chain, at Presidio, we have a really novel operations and supply chain class. Our operations class actually exposes us to real companies to serve real problems. Ravel is a pretty novel startup based in Seattle, and it is co-founded. The chief sustainability officer is an alumni from Presidio. A huge shout out and hat tip to the success that they're having early on. I was really bullish on working with Ravel, and I had the opportunity with a few people who are in the room today to really focus on Ravel's operations supply chain and help them enter a global market. Katie covered a lot on circular synthetics, and that's the problem space Ravel is actually tackling. So if you think of all those blended materials and fibers like many of us are wearing today, polyester is blended or maybe the primary ingredient of our shirts. They have a chemical bath process that's proprietary information, and they isolate essentially these chemicals, and they're able to make polyester pure again and resell it on the market to manufacturers and brands. It's pretty cool. They're actually doing this, as I mentioned, in Seattle as a pilot, but with the help of the operations and supply chain class, we're able to help them develop 3 models to scale their business and enter a global market and bring them closer to the global supply chain of synthetic fibers. Katie kind of hit on this. I have the opposite fact. She said 99% of clothes are wasted. In 2022, 150 billion clothing items were produced, and only 1% of those made its way to be recycled into new garments, and Ravel's helping to solve that. Through some of these classes, one problem has really stood out. Sorry, I'm like laughing because I think this is novel and I'm excited, and I really like Ifico, and you're about to meet Ifico, so I'm just like laughing at myself for this thing. But one thing has really become clear, that the apparel industry is ripe for a disturbance, and consumers are increasingly demanding more sustainable and ethically produced items. I started to have conversations over the next few semesters after those classes, and I've actually personally interviewed 45 people, and I'm starting conversations with luxury brands. And I'd like to introduce you to Ifico. This is Ifico. Through the design thinking class and through our integrative capstone, I've been able to start the early workings of a business idea that will help revolutionize the apparel industry. Ifico is a digital marketplace. It connects brands to consumers, and it is really focused on elevated sustainable lifestyle. So again, really looking at that luxury market. The word Ifico may not mean much to many people in this room, but it comes from this global constructed language called Esperanto. And as the inspiration from that is, it means effect. And so generally it refers to the results or outcomes of particular actions. And it really signifies the changes that we need to occur within the system of the luxury space. The market for sustainable men's products specifically is rapidly growing. And as I mentioned, consumers are increasingly demanding these products. And so this brings us to the Ifico approach. Being a gentleman and loving to shop in the luxury space, that's the market segment that I decided to focus on. But as you'll see through the next couple quick advances, Ifico has a robust strategy to help diversify our clientele. But starting in the masculine and unisex apparel space, we'll then quickly get into home and apparel and furnishings, because the homes and the spaces we live in have a lot of changes to be made as well. But once that's established and solidified, I'll refer to that as the lifestyle marketplace. And then once that market's validated, we'll quickly add in the feminine apparel side of things, rounding out what I refer to as the community. Our conscious consumers will be the Ifico community. And once we expand our market reach, we'll then be able to go with numbers and influence policy and make sure that those brands are actually producing goods more responsibly. And I think this is a huge market opportunity. Online apparel and lifestyle brands today are a $124 billion market. Gentlemen make up 30% of that. So 70% of all transactions are carried out by folks who identify as female or shopping feminine care products. And kind of looking at the trends and the success that Amazon has had, 8 out of 10 consumers in America are Amazon customers. And heck, I think Afico is pretty promising. So I took a 10% conversion rate of that. And Afico can start with just a $3.7 billion market opportunity. Speaking of our monetization, most of us as consumers are pretty familiar with a transaction fee. Afico has the idea to charge a 0.5% to 5% transaction fee, and then charge brands for product placement. So getting a transaction from Gucci or Louis Vuitton to list their regenerative and sustainable items on the site. And there's Afico collecting that coin right in the middle. I started with a little bit about me, but I've worked in tech and specifically software as a service for the last 9 years. I specialize in revenue operations, marketing, customer experience, and bringing early stage products to market. I was most recently at Aurora, which is a $4 billion company, via a $3.5 billion, and Remix, which had a successful exit of $100 million. I'm actually actively looking for co-founders and building out my executive team. Many thanks. And if anyone would like to talk to me after, I'm accepting mentorships, advisors, introductions to accelerators, and such. Thank you so much.
Let's get this company funded. All right, any questions for Drew in the room or online?
Katie, you wanna work on Afico? Yeah.
Are you connecting with data providers to validate brands that are on your platform? Recommendations?
Yeah, so I think what I understand is like how do we validate what sustainability is for an item, or how a product will constitute? So in this project in regenerative business practices, a lot of it actually comes down to supply chain and producer responsibility. And these luxury brands produce immense amounts of content and where they source their items and goods for. I think one specific example would be like tanneries. The tannery industry is known to be really toxic. And so right now, Louis Vuitton and Gucci are both sourcing from similar tanneries that hit this global standard of tannery. I think if Afico actually can build enough traction, it would be super interesting to make its own certification process where we're validating like third-party partnerships and navigating that for the consumer. Right now, if you were to go buy, say, like a tiny little wallet and you're like, oh, is this like sustainably produced? It's near impossible to find that information unless you're reading through quite literally thousands of pages on like LVMH or the holding company's websites on supply chain visibility and transparency. So yeah, part of Afico is like making that discoverable for the end consumer. Do we have what? Do we have competitors? There's one main company that continues to show up, and it's called like, oh my God, why am I having a brain fart? It's called like looks good to you, or like looks good on you. And they're predominantly focused in the female or feminine apparel market. And they're more of like a content producer. So they'll have blogs and they'll rate some companies, but they're still pretty early on. And they're not a purchasing platform. They're just like an education site. Yeah. I think that's time, but
Yeah.
happy to chat with people after. Thanks.
Thanks, Drew. That's it. All right, and last but certainly not least, one of our showcase fearless leaders, Reed, is up. And Reed will be talking about managing carbon emissions in the built environment. And this was a project coming out of the capstone course as well. All right, Reed.
Wow. Hi, everyone. All right. My name is Reed Llewellyn, and I'm going to talk to you today about how reducing emissions is a strategic advantage and the case for urgency within the commercial real estate industry. In 2015, 196 countries signed the largest climate agreement ever created, and this was known as the Paris Agreement. These countries, including the United States, agreed to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions in order to limit global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And the sole purpose of this agreement is to avert catastrophic climate change. And to get there, experts agree that we need to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. 2030 is quickly approaching. This was the number of days left until 2030 when I began this MBA program. And this is how many days are left as of today. In order to achieve 50% emission reduction, it will require the largest global transformation the world has ever undertaken. if we stay on our current path, everyone here today will feel the negative effects of climate change, not just future generations. So what do we do from here? We prioritize. We look for solutions in our economy that contribute most to the problem. 40% of emissions come from real estate. This is made up of residential and commercial buildings. And the emissions come from both the materials that these buildings are made of, as well as the energy required to maintain them. For perspective, the transportation sector, which you see up there on the left, which is often what we most hear about in our day-to-day lives, accounts for roughly 20% of all emissions. The stark reality is that many buildings around the world will be at risk of not being financially viable due to the impacts of climate change. And we can identify this risk by following the numbers. Many of the largest institutional investors are demanding greenhouse gas emission data from building owners. Think pension funds. Since we're in the state of California, many of you may be familiar with CalPERS or CalSTRS. They rank on the top 2 of this list, accounting for $444 billion in assets under management and $306 billion, respectively. They recognize that climate change is a material risk not only to society, the economy, but the impacts on our investment decisions. The problem is that not all investors are CalPERS and CalSTRS, and they're not demanding, and therefore building owners are not incentivized to track and then disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. Let's remember the urgency here, right? We have just over 2,000 days. We don't have time to wait for investors to push owners of real estate. In order to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, it will require the real estate industry to look at emission reduction as a strategic advantage. And I'm going to walk you through 3 reasons why emission reduction is a strategic advantage for building owners, especially large building owners. And the first one is lower operating costs. Let's start with an example we're all familiar with, the Empire State Building. This iconic landmark in New York City opened and was built in 1931. It was 102 stories, making it the tallest building for nearly 40 years until 1970. It attracts 4 million annual visitors, and it cost $40 million to build in 1930, which equates to just over $660 million today. Those are the stats that are well known. What is less known is that the Empire State Building consumes as much energy as 40,000 single-family homes. Because of the substantial usage, the owners decided to do a significant retrofit in 2009. And the good news is that this retrofit was extremely successful. It resulted in a reduction of energy use of 38%. But let's be really clear, the primary motivation behind this retrofit was to save money. In this example, saving $4.4 million in operating costs is the strategic advantage. The owners received a return on their investment in 1 to 5 years, depending on the specific retrofit project. And the lesson here is that this retrofit is repeatable. This is an example where we understood the problem, we had the technology, and we had, most importantly, the leaders who understood the strategic advantage of reducing emissions. Second reason why emission reduction is a strategic advantage is because it ensures access to capital. Oops. What is capital? It's a fancy word for money. Because buildings are so expensive, it takes a lot of money to operate them and buy them in the first place. And because of this, there are many different tranches of capital it takes. And it's important to know how buildings are funded if we're going to reduce emissions for them. So commercial buildings are typically funded in what's known as a 70-30 split. And what this means is that 70% of the money it takes all in to own that building is debt. So typically from a loan, from a bank, or another type of lender. And 30% is equity, comprised predominantly of individual investors that are known as limited partners. So let's take an example. Let's imagine you are the building owner of this real office building in downtown San Francisco. You bought it for $100 million in 2013. In 2020, due to the pandemic, occupancy rates dropped significantly. And for you, this means dramatic drop in operating income. But the good news is that you underwent a retrofit in 2017 that reduced your emissions and operating costs. This means that your investors still receive a return, and happy investors are more likely to invest again. But many building owners did not invest in energy reducing projects and lost investors due to this limited cash flow. No investors, no business model. The third reason, and final, why emission reduction is a strategic advantage is because it reduces risk. And there are, of course, many risks associated with any investment, but one of the biggest risks affecting commercial real estate and commercial buildings is adherence to mandatory disclosure policies. And we're going to look at two examples, one at the state level and one at the federal level. Starting with the state, let's go back to New York City. A local ordinance called Local Law 97 is essentially a carbon cap on buildings greater than 25,000 square feet. Again, prioritizing efforts on the largest buildings, the largest contributors to the problem. And remember, buildings will be at risk of not being financially viable due to the impacts of climate change. And state agencies like New York are acknowledging this and are acknowledging the risk to investors that it will, and therefore will impose fines to building owners who do not comply. Building owners have an option. They can either reduce emissions or pay fines. And if these fines are substantial enough, your business model is no longer viable. Now let's go to the federal level. The SEC, or the Security Exchange Commission, passed mandatory climate disclosure policy, and this is all happening very real time. So this is March 6th of this year. This ruling is truly monumental. It signifies to the market that climate risk is material to a business, just as material as revenue is to a business. You all have the ability, don't do it right now, but to go onto your phone and invest in a public company. And you should be made aware of all risks so you can make an informed decision, and the carbon emissions associated with that building is no different. We hear a lot of commitments today of companies going net zero by 2050. This is great to hear, but we must demand more from our leaders. You may have noticed that I did not once use the term sustainability or the acronym ESG during this presentation. This was intentional. We are not going to hit the necessary goals by 2030 by imploring companies to just be more sustainable. Emission reduction can be measured, and therefore it has a cost tied to it. We need your help to bridge the gap between the goal of the Paris Agreement and the business imperatives associated with reducing emissions. Owners of commercial real estate must quickly realize that reducing costs through emission reduction while delivering value to investors is just good business. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Reed. Yeah, we got time for a question or two. I don't know if there's anything on Zoom. I don't want to forget about them. Looks like we're good. All right,
Way
question
back.
in the room.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I work for a company called Measurable, and our goal is to measure emissions. And what you're outlining is really the biggest challenge, right? Is this sort of the scope 3 emission where the tenant is responsible for essentially paying the utility bill, right? And so we as a company are trying really hard to implore the owners of that building to get that information, but it's not always accessible. So a good example is, let's assume like an industrial owner, right? With a tenant like Amazon. A lot of times Amazon's not going to say, sure, here's my building usage information, right? Because they don't have to. And there's potentially risk to their business to disclose that information. So a lot of what's happening is what we've seen be successful is like green lease clauses. So before that industrial owner gives the lease to an Amazon, right, they sign a green lease clause saying that you basically have to disclose that information. So I think that's related. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I think that same lesson can be applied to multifamily housing that's, you know, an apartment, for example, that you may rent. It's going to change very quickly as building owners understand this operational cost is just going to continue to grow. And they really don't have a baseline from what we've seen. Many of the baselines start at 2019, 2020, so groups are just starting to measure this. Yeah, anything else?
All right. Oh, one last one.
Yeah.
That typical home take on small levels.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, definitely the focus is commercial buildings, and I think the reason for that is simple, a simple incentive, for investors. I think a lot of investors are demanding this currently, and now we're seeing regulation catch up. But I think for single-family homeowners, there's a lot of things you could do, and I think it's shocking how few business owners have even done something as simple as an LED retrofit to save money. And so I would say for a group here today to not assume you're doing all you can, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit like that. I think that's a good example. But yeah, have to get more specific. That's a good question. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Reed.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Really quick.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to also thank Alex before we stop. This was like, what, 4 weeks ago that we're like, we need to plan this event and we need to have it run really smoothly. And everyone just said, Alex, could do it. So huge testament to him for pulling this together and keeping it organized. I'm sure he'll tell us what to do next, but just want to give you a big thank you. And thank you all for being here. So I'll pass it back to you.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you, Reed. Yeah, thanks everyone. Take a deep breath. That was great. Let's give one round of applause for all of our presenters today. This is not a 10-minute break. That's okay. I'm done with school now. I don't have to worry about my slide organization. Really quick. So yeah, I guess the logistical items and whatnot are, we're doing a couple posters. I see, I think I see 3 back here from some of our fellow students. This is casual, but definitely like go up, get to know them. I think we can make this run smoothly if there's like a small group kind of talking all at once. We don't want someone coming up every 10 seconds, maybe throw off the flow. We'll kind of let this flow naturally, but let's like kind of pay attention to that. Various topics here, and yeah, you'll get some information on what they're doing, but I would say grab a drink first, relax. And this, for the most part, wraps up Showcase. The last thing I want to say, just like, well, I have a mic and I don't have the pressure of speaking at graduation tomorrow, just thanking my students, I feel like my colleagues, professors, everyone through this whole journey. It's been amazing, and I'm excited tomorrow to walk with you all. I know I had a semester off. It didn't make a whole lot of like a career development out of it, but like I think now that we're all in this together, looking for jobs together and like moving out in the world together, it's really exciting. And I just hope that we like keep what we've built over these last few years. Yeah, so thanks everyone for being here. This was great. Round of applause just for everyone who participated, helped out. Yeah, let's do it. Thank you. Yeah, grab a drink, there's some food, and go meet some of our poster presenters, please. Thank you. Thanks, buddy.